And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Leadership and Development, Courage in Chaos, an Introduction to Daring Leadership. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. She is a Brené Brown certified facilitator, Barb Van Heer. Barb, you now have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with all of you and share what I know about daring leadership. I think in particular this year is extremely trying for all of us, and it's never been more important to talk about daring leadership. And we'll go through why that is. First, I'll give you an introduction. So I am an executive coach. I'm a consultant in leadership development. I'm also a trainer. I've been doing this work for over 25 years. I know many of you, most of you, all of you are in the technology space, so you will probably be familiar when I say I started my career at Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture. Also worked at IBM Global Services doing very similar work, supporting large system transformations. Within organizations, doing organizational change, leadership development, communications, training, that kind of thing. And then in the last 12 years, I have focused more on being an executive coach, doing team building and leadership development. And I have been extremely happy to be partnering with Kara Flanagan and Kevin Rock and their Center for Leadership Development at New Horizons. And today we're excited to bring you this content because we, again, really feel like it's a great discussion to be having with all of you out there doing this work. Our agenda for today, our objectives are really to help you understand all of the dynamics around change and complexity and chaos. We all know these things are happening. We feel it. Sometimes we feel like we're going a little crazy with the pressures and stressors that we have, but it's helpful to kind of see where they're coming from so we can sort of accept them and then figure out what to do next. We'll also start to understand 5 typical responses you might have when the pressure, the chaos, the complexity gets a little overwhelming. When that starts to happen, all of us have some typical patterns that tend to create some armor and some barriers to us being the most effective leaders we can be. And we'll create a business case for this work so you can start to see what daring leadership can bring to your organization and bring to you and your work and your leadership. I do actually really believe each one of us is a leader in our own lives and in the work that we do, regardless of your position or title. And then we'll talk about just 3 really pretty fundamental basic tips that you can take away from this time we have together to be a more daring leader. Again, this isn't meant to replace or be in place of the training that's available through New Horizons, but it will give you some value coming out of this that you can try for yourself. And then of course, we'll save some time for questions. First, we'd like you to go into, is it, Mayanne, is it the chat function or the question area? We'd like all of you to take a chance to share with us what creates chaos or complexity, change, or stress for you at work.
You can put that all in the questions box.
Great. Yeah, and we'll get some help reading off what your responses are. But I assume all of you have some element of chaos, complexity, change, or stressors at work right now. And so we'd like to hear what's the most important on your radar, what's the maybe the most elevated, the most challenging for you in this moment. And then Mayanne, you'll be able to help me read some of those off.
Of course.
Great.
Here, we're just waiting to see. Someone said the new protocol, lack of leadership, lots of competing tasks from different stakeholders, working with team members that you don't normally work with or interact with, economic shifts.
Yes.
A lot of people are saying the lack of organization.
Yes.
More work with less people.
Yeah, all of those are, I'm imagining all of those are relevant for actually all of you. Some of them are just higher on the priority list maybe, but
a lot,
pretty typical.
Yep, a lot of folks, good answers, a lot of good answers that are really repetitive.
hmm So what's important to take away from this is all of us are experiencing some form of this. And I'll start to walk you through what exactly some of these dynamics are, but you're not alone. You're not crazy, and it's all going to be okay. But it is chaotic. We're in a chaotic time. So let's talk about these four dynamics creating chaos. Many of you may be familiar with the acronym VUCA. This became a term that started as a military descriptor of how our world changed from a U.S. perspective after 9/11. And from a military point of view, how they looked at warfare was quite different from what they had in the past. But it's also very relevant for anybody working in business today. The first dynamic is volatility. And you know what this feels like. It's high unpredictability, wild swings of ups and downs. It's very much a forced reaction to what's going on in your world, and there's a lot of pressure to take risks. The second dynamic is uncertainty, and there's a huge erosion of trust and truth and what we know to be real. And there's so many different points of view and different perspectives. It creates a lot of doubt and skepticism. Uncertainty creates a lot of pressure to act without having any kind of foundations or truth points to pivot from. The next dynamic is complexity, and you all are leading the charge in many ways on this. Our globalization and ability to connect globally creates a web of interconnectivity. And you, wherever you're sitting in the world, could do something here that impacts somebody all the way over here. And a lot of times we just don't have a sense of our unintended impacts when we're in such a tight-knit web of connectivity. And last is ambiguity. And again, we're forced to make judgment calls in this space. Nothing's really certain, and we can't use past predictors. Everything's very squishy is one way to put it, but ambiguity creates a lot of chaos as well. You all are familiar with this. There's a huge dilemma we all face around technology. And many of you are familiar with Moore's Law, but as technology, you guys are on the forefront of this, that exponentially increases our capabilities and our processing power, we also have this challenge. Our human adaptability is not quite as capable of following that steep curve of development. And so people and organizations change more systematically. It takes more time. And so we've got this challenge where companies really need to help close this gap and figure out that usability piece and a way of introducing change that allows humans to adapt to it. So this is something you all are right in the middle of, but it does create more chaos in our environment for everybody. This next slide is that we're entering a new age. So as leaders, we started with, let me go back up. The agricultural age, we went to the industrialization age. We went into more of an analytical information age, and that's what we're coming out of right now, where we have kind of a matrix environment, lots of data available to us. But this imagination age is completely new. And again, you all are leading the charge on this, but we're heading into artificial intelligence and virtual reality. And in this space, leadership must be different. People are more assets. Everything is simultaneous. Our emotional intelligence is critical. Our imagination and our creativity is the way we will find our value going forward. So it's important to understand this shift. Again, you all are probably in a better position than most leaders I know to navigate this because you're leading the charge here from a technology standpoint. But it's important to note that this creates some chaos in our world too. What we knew before in our information age isn't necessarily a good guidepost for what we're headed into. So again, it just creates more chaos and change in our world. And then this is just an overflowing glass but wait, there's more. 2020. We just have our regular lives at work. There's pressure around us for delivery. There's pressure around relationships. Some of you mentioned it's my team that's creating chaos, or it's my leadership creating chaos. There's all sorts of things about your career, your performance, what's next. Some of you may be just concerned about hanging on to your jobs for all, there's just a lot of chaos in the workspace right now. And that has nothing to do with all the other things I just talked about. There's also just life going on, your relationships in life, you're worrying about finances, your health, just balance and self-care. All of those things create more chaos and pressure in our lives. And then there's 2020, right? Global pandemic. We've got the anti-racism movement here in the US, a lot of political turmoil here in particular, and I'm sure around the world. I added some funny things here like murder hornets and meth gators, which I don't even know what's going on with that. But quite frankly, there's just a lot going on. And it's really important to give yourself some grace, because this complexity and chaos happens, but we have a choice. We do not have to make it more complicated than it already is. And so I really want you to know you're not crazy, you are not alone, and this is the new normal. There is no going back, and there's no surrender. There's only forward. So please give yourself some grace. I just wanted to give you that backdrop so you understand truly there's a lot going on. And so as leaders, we have to turn to the inside. We have very little control over what's happening outside around us. So what we do have control over is how we as leaders are showing up. And that's the big difference between armored versus daring leadership. And that's where I want to point you next. So here is the poll. And then Mayanne, I know you are going to pop up the ability for people to vote, and I'll just keep talking maybe while you pop that up. I'd like to understand what your typical reaction to chaos. So when things get crazy, how are you normally operating? Do you get overly nice and try harder to be liked? Because some people, that's a strategy that works. Do you get overwhelmed and just stuck? Do you get overly judgmental and critical? Or do you become overly controlling and forceful? So hopefully you can vote on there. There's another one in there, which is avoid or disengage. If that one is you, why don't you go to judgmental and critical? I know they're a little bit different, but we can put you in that bucket and it would make sense.
Great. I launched it a few seconds ago. So everyone, if you have a minute or to just put in your answer, we'll close it in a little bit.
It's helpful. It gives me some feedback about where you are. And all of us as humans have our bad days where we don't perform optimally. So what we're talking about is you under stress when you're not at your best. What is your typical reaction? And it's okay. It's anonymous.
All right. We have 20% say that they get overly nice and try harder to be liked. We have 28% saying they get overwhelmed and stuck. 29% say they get overly judgmental and critical. And 24% say they become overly controlling or forceful.
Yeah, that is really interesting and about what I would have expected too, based on the research that I'm seeing as well. And if we consider that the avoid and disengage is also in that judgment and critical piece, this is right in line with the research, folks. So let's walk through what some of these reactions look like. Am I back on? There we go. So let's take a look at these 5. So the first category is being overly nice and pleasing. I call it fold. So if you think about fight, flight, freeze, and fold, fold is where your strategy is really to try to maintain those relationships. You really try to be pleasing to those around you, make sure that you're meeting their needs, and very complying. But here's the challenge for that style, if we stay there, is that we stop acting based on our needs and we're not attending to those. And sometimes we're focused so much on keeping the relationship safe, we are less inclined to take those risks and bold moves and really say what we need to say and push and take action and move things forward, because maybe we won't be liked if we do that. So again, it's a strategy. All of us have some of these, so we're just going to give ourselves some grace, but it's helpful to understand that is a type of armor. The next one is to freeze. And that's where, you know, chaos reigns and we just don't know what to do. And so you end up having this kind of overwhelm, overload, you know, swirling circle of, you know, whatever, you're just stuck, like your computer's frozen. You just become very unproductive and inefficient in that space. It's just a full sense of flooded overwhelm. And again, all of us have moments where we understand what this feels like. It's hard to stay here though, because then of course you're not able to speak up, get things done, you know, get into relationships, you're more just frozen. The next one, this makes perfect sense to me on some days, is to run. It basically though is when you're at work and you're feeling this overwhelm, this flight piece has you avoid or disengage. You become elusive. I actually have sometimes heard stories of people just not even showing up to work, right? So there's a sense of like, man, I don't know if I can even handle this today. I just can't be present. So again, sometimes there's a running to go get stuff done in a more quiet space, but other times it's just really important to think about that as armor, and it's keeping you from being in relationship and contributing and being engaged at work. Again, it makes perfect sense to me on some days. The next one is judge. This is where, in order to kind of handle the craziness, we start to become overly critical. Now, again, we're trying to handle the situation, we're trying to get on top of it, but the impact on those around us has a tremendous cost to it. So where the criticism, judgment, and the fault finding then gets discharged to those around us, and it can create some trouble with relationships. And then there's, of course, the fight response where we become overly controlling. We try to really muffle down and handle all of this. It becomes very perfectionistic and also can end up having a shaming effect on those around us as well. It ends up hurting our relationships, but sometimes it feels like that fight response helps us get stuff done. So I just want to say, again, a lot of grace for all of us. All of us have some of these patterns. We develop them young. On a stressful bad day, this is where we go, but it's important to understand there's an impact here. There's some research that says 70% of us as adults are operating here all day, every day. So really our world is so chaotic, we can't do anything but operate here. And so the goal is really to try to get better than that and try to figure out how we can handle our stress and handle the chaos and handle the overwhelm so that we're able to choose how we want to respond versus feel like we have to react. So this self-protection, you know, response and reactive response is really what armored leadership is all about. Dr. Brené Brown would say we all use armor to protect ourselves, but that armor is heavy. It prevents us from growing, being seen, and being in connection with others. When we are in fear or an emotion is driving self-protection, there's a fairly predictable pattern of how we assemble our armor. So again, she's normalizing it, but also saying there's a cost associated with this. So the goal is to create spaces where armor is neither necessary and it's not rewarded, and courage is the antidote to fear rather than armor. So that's what we're after. There's a lot of risk associated with armor. So from those 5 categories, here's the impact based on her research on what happens when we're in an armored culture. We have this decrease in feedback and communication. And nobody can really speak up or say what they need to say because they're worried about, you know, people responding and blaming them for speaking up, right? So there's a decreased amount of feedback, which means nobody's getting any better. There's a lot of increase in problematic behaviors. So a lot of people are operating from fear, out of that armor, out of the chaos, and instead of leaders dealing with feelings, they're dealing with the problems associated from not being that emotionally intelligent leader you need to be. So a lot more increase in problematic behaviors. There's a decrease in trust. Increased setbacks. So oftentimes armored leaders will become stuck when a setback occurs. More creative leaders will handle a setback and learn and move forward, but when we're all armored up, we get sort of stuck in that setback and have a hard time moving forward. Decreased innovation, absolutely. It's not safe to speak up, innovate, have creative ideas. There's a worry about how that's all going to be criticized, judged, or there's just too much going on, right? Decreased problem solving, decreased inclusivity, diversity, and equity. It becomes very unsafe to have the meaningful conversations we all must have, so all of us feel included, all of us feel a sense of equity, and all of us feel valued for all of the diversity we all bring. Those conversations kind of go down the drain when we're all armored up. It just doesn't feel safe. There's a lot of an increase in shame and blame as a strategy. There's decreased values and integrity. So people just have a sense that values that are up on the posters with the eagle on the wall, those are just more gauzy values. They're vague. There's not behaviors to back them up. And so there's not a lot of alignment, and there's a risk of eroding integrity around how the company operates and organizes. And there's a lot of decreased growth and learning. It's just not safe to put yourself out there and expand. So hopefully this makes the case. Armored leadership really shuts down the potential for a company to operate at its full potential. There's a huge risk here, and yet 70% of all organizations and leaders are operating in this space. So there's a lot of opportunity to make things better. So that's the good news. Next up, so in her latest book, Dare to Lead, she interviewed a lot of C-suite executives. What do we need to do today in order to successfully navigate this changing environment that we're in, the seemingly intractable challenges, unsolvable, insatiable demand for innovation? What do we do? And the answer is we need braver leaders and more courageous cultures. So all of this is research-based. She's been working on this for years, and this is a very clear answer and response to the chaotic world that we're in. And the essence of courage, courage equals vulnerability. You cannot have any instance of courage without also being vulnerable. The definition of vulnerability is the emotion that we experience when we are faced with risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. So courage and vulnerability are the same. That means we as leaders and humans on this planet need to start getting comfortable facing risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. We're building the capability and the resilience to do that more. And that'll create daring leadership. So some of the benefit of daring cultures, again, communication increases when we're able to step into vulnerability. There's better decision making because you hear all the voices and everybody can contribute, and then the best decision gets made. There's a better sense of resilience and a recovery from setbacks versus stuck in setbacks. Increased adaptability, ability to handle this increase in change that just doesn't seem to ever go away. Increased productivity. There's a decrease in toxicity. There's an ability to handle disagreements rather than heading into that armored space, which just ends up creating kind of a toxic environment where people aren't able to speak freely and deal with differences of opinion and points of view. There's increased growth and ROI. We know this from the research, increased engagement and retention. There's more integrity and alignment in the system, and increased empathy and connection. So clearly being in that space of courage and vulnerability creates, you're gonna enjoy going to work better. Companies will perform better. There's better connections with customers. I mean, basically these daring cultures really can move ahead of others, but for you personally, you will feel a stronger sense of self and enjoyment and connection with the work that you're doing. So here we're heading into the 3 tips that will support some daring leadership coming out of this webinar. webinar. I just picked 3 that I think will be really helpful to you based on the information I've just shared. The first one is self-awareness. So start to think about how you put down your armor and where it's safe to do so. A lot of people and leaders will, well, I'll get to that in a second, but so self-awareness is the first one. Empathy. The one thing I'd like you to really focus on with empathy is listening deeply to others. We'll talk about that. And then last is resilience. So really question your assumptions. That'll help you rebound and get to a new space quickly when you're stuck in a setback. So we'll walk through each of these. Self-awareness. Let's talk about taking off your armor. The first question I'd like for you to reflect on is, what is your typical armor? So you've already done that. We had the numbers. Start to think about what that is and what are the triggers that cause you to have that bad day. When you think about the first poll that we did, or the first chat, what creates chaos and complexity? Your triggers probably live in something that you responded to there. So what are the things that really will put you into reaction quicker than anything else? It's helpful to be aware of that so that you have a plan in place. When those triggers start to show up, you can start to see it and make some different choices. So understand your triggers and then start to notice, what's the impact? What's the impact of you being overly nice? Like, what's the trade-off? Are you feeling like you aren't honoring yourself and what you need? Or if you're overly judgmental, what's the impact on those around you? What's the impact if you're being overly controlling and stuck? So take a look at what's happening to those around you when you're in that place. That'll start to give you some motivation as well. So for now, just notice what's your armor, what are the triggers, and what's the impact of that armor, and it'll start to shift. For empathy, listening. So this is just, all of us want to show up at work and be seen and heard. And so how can you offer that to others? It will start to shift things tremendously at work if you start to ask open-ended questions rather than leading questions. Not data and fact questions, but just, what's important to you? What is it you want? Things like that. You're just listening. You start with what, they're short questions, and you don't know the answer. You're really going to then listen and focus intently on what the other person shares. And when you're listening, try your best to set aside your own thoughts and ideas, your own judgments or ability to problem solving or distraction. Set that aside and just keep your focus on the other person. It will do a huge amount to shift cultures and to get into more daring leadership. And I didn't put this down here, but you can start to ask people around you and design with others when you want to be listened to. So find a buddy and find somebody that you can talk to as well. You'll feel better when you're heard, and others around you will feel better when they're listened to. And the resilience, question your assumptions. So here, these questions can really, rock your world here. What's the story you're telling yourself? So when you find yourself stuck in reaction or having a tough day, what's the story you're telling yourself? And if you really allow yourself, like, wow, I'm really, I don't know, making up a story about my boss hating me, or I'm making up a story about my teammate who is out to get me. And it's like, wow, that doesn't really make sense. But give yourself permission to, what's that story you're telling yourself? But is there another way of looking at it? There's a way in which you can start to see truth in many different perspectives. So there may be another way of looking at this, like, wow, this person's actually showing up and doing the best they can. And they're in a pretty challenging situation. I was working with a CFO, and he thought, gosh, his direct report was really struggling. He said, gosh, I just realized her job is complicated and hard. And once I realized that was true, I was able to deal with her reaction a little differently. So what's the story you're telling yourself? What's another way of looking at this? And then this last one is, what self-care will help you recover? Now, here's the thing, we know this. You need to sleep, you need to move, you need to take time out, embrace mindfulness and pauses. Gratitude, also a powerful self-care lever. Take care of yourself. We are in crazy times. Your resilience and ability to navigate the chaos depends on your ability to take care of yourself. So that's another tip for you. I'm going to close with a quote that inspired Brené Brown to write Daring Greatly and Dare to Lead from Theodore Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who knows at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. And the whole basis of Brené Brown's Dare to Lead work is helping you get in the arena, but not with armor, just with your grounded confidence and ability to lead with courage. There are 4 skill sets in the 3-day Dare to Lead, 24-hour Dare to Lead course. There's a big, deeper dive into rumbling with vulnerability, living into values, braving trust, and learning to rise. So these 4 skill sets really help support creating daring leadership. And start to think about what's next for building brave leadership and courageous cultures for you and where you work. I'm gonna turn it over now. We have some time for questions and answers here. I believe, Kara, you're up next, right? Speaking about New Horizons and how your Center for Leadership Development can take these concepts and go even further and deeper into them too. Kara?
Thanks, Barb.
Great, okay, good.
Perfect. If you don't know, New Horizons has been teaching virtual training since 2001. So we've been doing remote delivery for a very long time. We do it really well. All of our facilitators and instructors are trained to teach face-to-face and virtually. A lot of people ask us, how do you do leadership training online? And it's just invented in a different way. It's a little more creative. You get into breakout rooms, and we do a lot of things that way. Our Center for Leadership and Development courses have, 50 to 60 post-class resources with them so that you continue your learning. We don't want you to take a class and then just walk away. There's a continual learning process that happens so that you continue that long-term growth. And so for more information on any of our classes, you can go ahead and reach out to your account executive or your educational consultant. On our website, there's a link here, and you can get this in the email that you'll get after the webinar. But if you click here, there's lots of classes that what Barb talked about today relates to. There are some specifically that do expanding your emotional intelligence. Obviously, managing remote and virtual teams is very, very important right now, and leading change in a complex world. Also, as Barb said, is very important in the VUCA environment that we are in. And then also mastering positive assertiveness. As Barb talked about, being vulnerable to get to courage, you have to have that assertiveness to be able to do that. And so finding your voice and being able to take that risk sometimes to do that is really important.
And Kara, I know, so I'm certified as a Dare to Lead facilitator. Right now, Kara and I are just having some conversations. If you have any interest in bringing Dare to Lead into your organization, please reach out to Kara, and she and I can handle any questions if you have any interest in that. But for right now, it's not a public course through New Horizons. It's just something we can have a conversation about.
Yep, absolutely.
So questions. I happy to take any questions. I'm realizing I ran through that fairly quickly. We have plenty of time and lots of great resources between Kara, Mayanne, and myself to answer any questions you might have.
Not a problem. Thank you so much. Anyone, if you have questions, feel free to put it into the questions box and we'll get to those in just a second. Just wanted to remind everyone that if you're interested in any of the material that's presented today in this webinar, or if you just have any questions regarding what's available to you, please contact your local center for more information. You can log on to newhorizons.com and do a quick zip code search to find the center that's nearest you. Also, our webinar schedule is constantly being updated. We are in the midst of adding a lot of great sessions for the back half of the year. So if you want to click on the webinars link on our website, you can see what's available to you and what will be coming down the pipeline. And lastly, just wanted to remind everyone that I will be sending out an archive recording link to view today's webinar. That way you can pass it along to any colleagues who may find this information valuable, review anything that you may have missed, or just share it with anyone you think that would find this information really, really interesting. So we do have a couple questions. Again, everyone, if you have any, please feel free to type it in. The first one is, can you say more about the age of imagination? The person says, I love language and it piqued my interest, but would love to know more about what is behind this.
Absolutely. And, you know, there are just starting to be some books that are starting to talk about what we're moving into. But and as a contrast, let me go back. Right now, we're still in the age of information where we're looking at analytics. We're a lot more iterative. And we're looking at customer-centric is where we are right now. When we go to the imagination age, what that's going to be driven by is massive connectivity and interwoven globalization, where and also driven by virtual reality and artificial intelligence. And I go to the great movie and book Ready Player One, where everybody lives in virtual reality and there's very little time spent in the real world. And maybe it won't go to that level. But in this age of imagination, everything is so simultaneous and interconnected. The only way we can operate is with massive amounts of intuition and creativity, which is very different from our analytical driven approach right now. But everything is very user driven in that environment versus kind of top down or company driven. So the customer becomes the creator of what's happening. I'm just looking at some of my notes. There's a lot more shared leadership in this space and a flattening out of organizations where there's an, I don't know that this is exactly the right way to say it, but it's a sense of a differing sense of equality that starts to come in this imagination age that's not as available here in the information age. We're a little more top down or matrixed. Again, yeah, there's a huge amount of disruption too in the imagination age, meaning a user anywhere in the world, and you can start to see this with our social media platforms, individuals have power. It is not just companies, countries, you know, a top-down sort of leadership approach. Individuals can have a voice even in this new space. So hopefully that helps. We're going to need a lot more emotional intelligence to navigate a space like that. It's just going to take a lot more creativity to get into this new way. And New Horizons is really well positioned to help that disruption of labor too. So there's going to be, the way we used to get and do work and get things produced and done is shifting even now, and technology is the way. And New Horizons knows how to get all of you capable and ready to handle that and bring more people along too.
Great answer. The next question is, how do you recommend taking that first step to change the culture in your business? I want to get the courage, but I feel like I will get lots of resistance.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm sorry you feel like you're the only one resisting in a culture that might be a little challenging for you to navigate, and hang in there. I think knowing yourself first, and some of the courses that Kara showed, and can actually go back to that, some of these courses so that you know yourself better will help you find the courage, and find some allies. So see if you have peers. There may be leaders that are in other parts of the organization. If your boss is the one that's a challenge, try to find some safe places where you can start to build some momentum and mass. Certainly, if you can find anybody in the talent or human resources area that are willing to consider training everybody in sort of the same sets of tools and skills, there's a way to create culture change when you can bring more people along with you learning what you need to learn. And you may have to get brave and speak up. And so try to find a way, find a buddy who can help you bring up some of those tougher conversations, and see if you can start to take some risks without putting yourself in any kind of risks you can't handle. Meaning, if you speak up, are you able to, hold the consequence? Hopefully it'll go well. I really encourage being brave, and also just be really clear about what some of the risks are. So hopefully that made some sense.
Great. Another question that came in is, how can someone work on developing his or her confidence in general?
That's a great question. I really believe, as many leadership development folks do, is that you need to have a strong understanding of your strengths. Each one of you has huge value and purpose and reason for being here. And so getting connected with what you're good at is a great place to start. The second, so understanding your personality and your strengths in that space. There is also some great help and confidence in understanding your values. And that also is part of the Daring Greatly program, but really understanding what's meaningful and important to you. All of us have sets of values. For most of us as humans, they tend to be aligned in many places, but your unique set of values will help you find confidence, because you can lean into those. The reason you would want to be brave and courageous is because those values are important for you to honor. And often when we're feeling small and a little more, overwhelmed by our circumstances, we're missing that connection to our values. So that's another place to look. And last, if you've ever done any TED Talk viewing, there's a woman named Amy Cuddy, C-U-D-D-Y. She has a great TED Talk on posture. And so one of the things I do, especially when I need to talk or do webinars or things like this, or even do my training, is I do that Superman power pose or Wonder Woman, where shoulders are back, chest forward, hands on hips. And if you can hold that for 2 minutes, some of her research would suggest that your posture will support confidence as well. So those are 3 things that might help you.
Great. Another question is, how can we develop our skills to control more of our stress during a time of chaos?
Building your skills. I think understanding the aspects of emotional intelligence are really important. Understanding the change journey. There's kind of a predictable response to change. So again, some of these classes that are available here, certainly understanding your reactions, so that you can start to see and stop it before basically the reactions are trouble. All of our reactions are trouble when they're unconscious. And we don't even notice that all of a sudden we're being overly judgmental and critical, or we don't even notice that we're sort of slowed down with stuckness. So it's really important to understand your armor and when it's happening, and then truly that resiliency stuff. Honestly, if all of us got enough sleep, and we took care of our bodies and started moving a little bit more, those things, and mindfulness, huge impact. There's research that supports that. So if you just got a good night's sleep, did your exercising and did some mindfulness, pausing and slowing down and breathing, that would probably change the world.
Oh, great. Another good question that came in is, do you have any tips for breaking down the armor in the heat of the moment? For example, in the middle of a difficult conversation?
Yeah. So breathing is big. Giving yourself, if you can just take a deep breath, 3 or 5 seconds and then set it out, huge. That'll help you in the moment. Brené Brown also has a set of rumble skills, and one of the key ones she uses with her team on a regular basis is circle back. Sometimes so what happens when we're under extreme stress like that and you get into a heated conversation in a meeting, our cortisol goes up and we get into kind of our limbic, reptile brain, and I think I've heard it's about 17 to 18 minutes of that rush of cortisol where everybody in the room is hijacked. And so there's a lot of sense to taking a break and circling back. And so if you can notice, hey, feels like tension's running really high right now. I don't think we're going to get anywhere productive with how we're looking at this right now. Why don't we take a break for half an hour and come back? Or why don't we all take a break overnight and come back tomorrow in the morning and take a look at this? So those are, you have to take a look at the human physiology, the body, because you can't rationalize your way through that if you're hijacked. So taking a break and circling back is huge. The other thing, it's part of the assumptions and the resilience factor, is if you can take a moment and start to notice that you're making up a story, and you start to say, the story I'm making up here that's causing us to be in this disagreement is this, this, and this. And if you're brave enough to throw that out there, then somebody can say, hey, that's not where I'm coming from. Well, we can sort this out. So sometimes, though, just clarifying assumptions, if you're able to get there and you're not super hijacked, that can change everything, because oftentimes those disagreements are faulty assumptions. Those are just a couple of ideas.
Great. Another question that came in is, can you offer any strategies or tactics for dealing with constant interruptions?
Boundaries. I don't know. You may not have a door, but if you can design with people office hours or when you're able to take some things, it probably depends much on your job, so I'm not sure I'm going to be as helpful in giving you specifics. I'm a strong believer in boundaries. There is nobody, there's no company, there's no relative, there's no anybody that can hold your boundaries for you. You are the only one who can set them and keep them. Now, you're not going to be perfect, and you don't want to armor up, but healthy boundaries of what's okay and what's not okay is part of daring leadership. So if you need some uninterrupted time, fight for it. Get it, put it in the calendar, close your door, turn everything off, do what you need to do. I don't know. It's important, so I want that for you. I'm not sure I totally told you how to do it, but hopefully that gave you some ideas. It's important.
Great. A few more questions here as we hit the top of the hour. How do you deal with negativity and the lack of productivity in a time of uncertainty?
From others or from yourself, I wonder. In others, I tried that listening piece. Oftentimes that lack of productivity is because people are stuck and they have fears and feelings that are driving them being stuck. So if you are the leader, sitting down to listen to their humanness, not just trying to solve problems and get the job done, but what's going on, how they're feeling, how they're coping, and connecting that way and listening to them can help quite a bit. If it's you, can you repeat the question again? I want to make sure I'm getting this right.
How to stay positive and productive in a time of uncertainty?
Yeah, for you personally, staying positive and productive, again, sleep, movement, mindfulness, and gratitude is a big one. I've seen it work with many of my coaching clients, is to spend some time at the end of each day with gratitude. Yeah, I mean, if you go back to these classes here, it's not just as easy as me giving you a few things to work on, obviously, and I think you're aware of that, but really just trying to continue to get those resiliency skills, understanding change, understanding your reactions, minimizing the stress inside of you as much as you can, because you can't change your circumstances, but you can upgrade your internal operating system. And so all of these courses will have some great suggestions for that.
Great. Couple more here. How can we learn to understand oneself better and be honest with ourselves in a time of chaos?
That's a good question. Making time for it. A lot of times I'll suggest that leaders block a half an hour to an hour a week so that they can do some of that self-reflection. Finding a buddy that can give you some feedback, some honest, helpful, productive feedback can be really helpful. A lot of leaders that I work with will do some journaling or reflection that way, so they can kind of reflect on the day and see how it went and start to notice patterns or see what's happening, some of those triggers. And really, it's just a commitment on your part to want to know yourself better and to take those blinders off that we all, when stress happens, we all just whoop, like we narrow our world. But it's having the courage, even you just asking that question, I know you'll be looking differently. So it's starting to notice how you're responding, what's happening around you, and it slows things down just enough so that it starts to change over time.
Great. Another question that someone had was, she tends to be a bit more nervous. So how can she kick the nerves during a meeting and still feel that her voice is being heard and she's still being confident?
Yeah, the Amy Cuddy, C-U-D-D-Y, work of doing the Wonder Woman pose 2 minutes before you go into the meeting. Also doing some breathing as you go in. But when you're sitting in the meeting, definitely still keep your posture up and shoulders back. If you start to notice your shoulders rolling forward, you'll have a hard time being brave and kind of looking down like this. So arrange yourself in the chair to be solid and sturdy. And there's just a whole lot more work that a coach or a course could do to help you understand what your strengths are and your values and what makes it important for you to speak up. But your voice is so important, and find a way. Hopefully, I doubt it will be the end of the world. I really do. Like, you can probably go way bigger than you ever thought, and it'll be fine. You're strong enough to handle whatever mess you make. So trust yourself.
Great. We have a couple more here. The one question here that just came in is, how do I tell the difference between actually having too much work to realistically complete, or when I'm just too stressed out about the type of work I'm doing? Sometimes things seem bigger than they actually are. When I'm given extremely difficult tasks or projects to complete and mistakes, if we're being too much to take on.
Wow, that is such a good question, and I'm not all the way sure I'm gonna be able to give you something to hang on to here, but because sometimes there's a lot of work to do, and all of us know what that feels like. And companies, sometimes we have push time and deadlines we have to meet. So that may just be more of a set focus. But if you're doing some of those things around self-reflection, and able to kind of figure out how it feels different when you're just in overwhelm, like there's just that's again, the chaos out there you can't change, but having that time to look within, it may feel like you don't have time because of that long list of stuff to do. But I know Gandhi had some great quotes about it's going to be a busy day, so I need to meditate more, right? So again, I'm not suggesting 2 hours, but that 10 minutes of self-reflecting, like what's mine? Where am I reacting here? Or is it just, I got to push, and just having a moment to breathe, take a look at your priorities, make a list, get things sorted out, can help you start to make those distinctions. But I don't know that I have any magic tool for you on that one. So I'm sorry, that was a really good question. Hopefully that helps a little.
No, I think you did. Gosh, right on time, as I would say. We are at the top of the hour. Thank you again for joining us, everyone. As a reminder, we'll be sending out the recording later today. With that being said, thank you, Barb, for presenting on behalf of New Horizons. And everyone, you may now log off from the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.